Welcome everybody to our webinar today. It's called Using Panels and FCS Express for Flow Cytometry. My name's Kaya Ghosh. I'm a technical application specialist with Novo software. And hopefully most of you are familiar with FCS Express, but if you're not, we've been making flow cytometry software for about 15 years now. We're based out in LA. So we're really glad to have you here and how they can help you automate your data analysis for flow cytometry. Okay, so for those of you who have just started logging on, I just want to point out again this GoToWebinar control panel here. If you only see the skinny little bar, you can expand it by clicking on the orange arrow. And then if you have a question throughout the course of the webinar, just please enter that into where it says enter a question for staff. And either our staff members on the line or I'll get back to you. Okay, so today we're going to be talking about panels, and what we'll cover today are what are panels and when are they useful. And then we'll begin working with panels together by creating a panel, loading the panel with our data file, modifying the panel, and then we'll even do a quick batch processing of the panel layout. And if we have time, we'll show you how you could combine a Diva imported layout or the Accuri imported layout with panels in FCS Express. Okay, so I'm actually going to start out by talking a little bit about when panels are useful. So strangely enough, I'm going to show you an example of a layout where you don't need to use a panel. This is a very simple layout where if you look at the titles of the plots, I only have sample1.fcs showing on all the plots. So when you only have one tube showing on your layout at a time, you could easily reuse this template over and over again for repeated experiments just by clicking previous and next here on the data tabs. So I'm shuffling between sample 1 and sample 2. So this is a simple FCS Express layout that I'm using as a template, and no panel is engaged. You can see here at the bottom where it says no panel is active. I've highlighted it. Maybe it's a little bit difficult to see. So right down here it says no panel is active. Okay, so this is a simple layout with no panel active, and basically you can reuse this for a simple experiment. So if I've repeated this 2-tube experiment, all I need to do to reuse this layout is just load in my files again from the repetition of my experiment. So here I'm going to load in these 2 files. So I have experiment 2, samples 1 and 2, and I can just click next to advance to those tubes. Okay? So that's just to point out that panels aren't mandatory to use your layout as a template, but where panels really do come in handy for you are here. So this is an example of a multi-tube experiment. Maybe you can see at the bottom page tabs here I've got 9 or 10 different pages in this layout, and I also have multiple tubes showing on my layout, which you can't see right now because this layout was saved as an unlinked panel, so there's really no FCS files showing in my data. Okay, but what I'm going to do now is show you how this panel works. So you can see where I'm pointing with the arrow that we have a panel called cell types that's currently active, and if I click on it, you can see that it consists of 5 tubes. Okay, so I'm going to load in those 5 tubes, and you can watch what happens. Okay, so just with the click of a button, you can see that all of my plots have been automatically populated with my data. And if this data came in the incorrect order, for instance, it came in alphabetical order here, I can use these little blue up and down arrows to send the FCS file to its correct tube. Okay, so the advantage of a panel is FCS Express will send each FCS file to the assigned plots. Okay, so every tube in this panel, tubes 1 through 5, FCS Express will send those to the appropriate plots or other objects on your layout, such as these statistics tables. Okay, so if I mouse over, for instance, this plot here, you can see that the B cell tube is showing in it. I'm not sure if you can see, but it's that yellow hover text there. Whereas if I come over here to my myeloid page, and I mouse over here, my mono tube, this tube number 4, has been sent to this plot. So FCS Express is automatically sending every FCS file to the correct place. And that saves you a lot of time because you don't need to drag and drop FCS files to their correct plots, which is a little bit error prone. And you also don't need to, for instance, multiply select plots and use these change data on selection or change data on all objects buttons, okay? The panel will do that for you automatically, all right? And the really nice thing is you can use this panel layout for batch processing just like you would any other layout. So what I'm going to do is add in 5 more tubes from when I repeated this same experiment. Okay, and let's just reorder this appropriately so the T-cell tube's number 2. Okay, and now if I click Next, keep an eye on these plots. Okay, you can see that the data file changed a little bit. Let me go to a different. Let's go to these plots instead. So if I click Previous and Next, you can see clearly that the data files are changing. Okay, so it's very easy to use this in a batch process. And what we'll do is the batch processes in this layout have already been defined, so I'm going to quickly kick off that batch process so you can see how you can combine batch processing and panels in FCS Express to really process your data in a throughput manner. All right, and this should be popping up any minute now. Okay, so this is our layout, and we only have 8 slides, or only have actually here, seems like it's not quite done, but we will have 8 slides because I only chose to batch process the first 4 pages to PowerPoint here. Anyway, here it is. So this is real nice. So you've processed your panel layout using batch processing to PowerPoint. Okay, and so all of these, of course, are individual objects. And if you want to know more about batch processing, we do have a webinar all about batch processing as well. Okay, so I'm not going to talk more about that. But if you do have a question, just feel free to enter that into the questions and answer box. Okay, so what we're going to do today is, after I've introduced to you what a panel is, we're going to go on to working with panels and learn how to create them together and load our data files into them and do all these other great things. Okay, so let's go to this next page. So this is a much more simple panel than that 10-page panel layout I just showed you. This is just 1 page. And if you take a look here at our data list, you can see that there's 3 tubes in our panel, which you can see here. We named the panel 3 tube. So it says panel 3 tube is active here at the bottom. Okay, and so what this panel is about is basically it's a panel for testing antibodies. So it's testing the antibody binding of your sample, which is the red histogram, the red overlay in this histogram, against the gray shaded isotype control and the black positive control in our layout. Okay, and so what we can do now that this panel's already been defined is I just want to show you that just like before, we can load in additional data files. So let's select those. I'm going to select the second isotype control and positive controls and sample B. And then I can click Next. And keep an eye on the sample isotype control fluorescence ratio. So this is a custom ratio we've defined in FCS Express custom tokens. And it's just basically reporting to us the fluorescence ratio between the sample and the isotype control. So if your experiment's working, of course, you would probably want that to be above 1. So I'm going to click Next. And so now you can see I've got an isotype control ratio, a sampled isotype control ratio of about 3, and my data has updated on the plots. Okay? So that's how a panel works for you basically. So now that you have a pretty good idea of what this panel is supposed to do, let me show you how you can build this panel from scratch. Okay, so this is a layout that is basically identical to the panel layout I just showed you, only no panel has been defined on this layout. So again, if I just point out down here, it says no panel is active, okay? And if I click on here, you'll see that no panels have been associated with this layout yet. So this just goes to show you that we can easily take any layout you might have created it weeks ago and decide to convert it into a panel after the fact. So there's no need to enter into layout building with the premeditated notion of making a panel. You can just make anything into a panel at any time you want, okay? So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to either click on my Data tab and click on Panels, or identically you can click down here where it says No Panel is Active to get to that panel making dialog. And let's add in a new panel. And I'm going to call this my antibody binding panel. And let's define 3 tubes. And here we can name each tube. Okay? So you don't need to name each tube if you don't want to. But especially when you're starting out, I would suggest giving a name to each tube because that way you'll reduce confusion when you're loading in your data files later on. Okay, and you'll know where to send each data file to each tube. So let's call this first tube our isotype control. And the second tube our positive control, and we'll call the third tube our experimental sample that we're testing. All right. And now as soon as I click OK, this panel is going to become engaged on the layout. So take a look at our data list. So you can see that the isotype iso.fcs data file has been assigned to the isotype control tube in our layout, and so on and so on. Okay. Are there any questions about that? If you needed to reorder those, you could easily use them by mousing over these blue up and down arrows, and it says move selected files up or down. Okay. So now, before we load in our next iterations, I just want to show you that after you've defined a panel, it's very easy to amend the panel, so there's a lot of flexibility here. So I've already built my panel, but maybe I decide, I really want to look at another bivariate plot of my sample. Well, I can easily do that. I'm just going to drag this out from my data list. And let's insert a color dot plot onto our layout. And let me choose a couple of fluorescence parameters here. Okay, so if I needed to look at this or add any gates or do whatever I wanted to do, okay, I could do that here. And my panel is still intact. And now I can choose to add in some more layouts and some more data files. And I see a question asking, why do I have 3 tubes but only 2 plots on the layout? That's a very good question. And the reason for that is because you don't need to have a one-to-one iteration between the number of tubes and the number of plots on your layout. Here you can see that we're only looking at our sample A.fcs tube as the red overlay on our histogram, so it didn't have a plot of its own before I defined it over here. And basically that's because when you're building a panel, any FCS file can go to any plot or it can go to no plots. It really doesn't matter. So you don't need to have that one-to-one correlation. You can build your layout however you want. Just make sure that for every FCS file that's represented on your layout that you do have a tube for that FCS file. Okay? And if anybody needs any help starting to design a panel together, just let us know. We can probably help you out offline. Okay, so I'm going to load in some data files from the next time that I repeated this experiment. So let's load in my second isotype control and positive control and my sample B. All right, and if I come over here to my data tab, I can cycle between my iterations here, okay, by clicking next. And so now you see that I'm looking at sample B. Maybe I'll make this title a little bit bigger. Actually, I can make all my titles a little bit bigger here in FCS Express so it's easier for you folks in the webinar to see it. Make it 14. Okay, so you can see now I'm looking at sample B. This is a little cut off, but you can easily reformat those titles to be different keywords or whatever you want. Okay, and we have an updated sample isotype control fluorescence ratio. Okay, are there any questions about that? Okay, so just like we ran a batch process before with that 10-page layout that we looked at earlier, we can actually run a batch process on this layout just as well, and we've already defined our batch actions. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail because we do talk about our batch actions in our Getting Started webinars, and we have a webinar specifically for batch processing actions. But I just want to show you that I've lined up a PowerPoint export here. Okay, and it's going to be exported to a file called isotype control panel 3. Okay, so let's just run that real quick, and you can see how we can combine, once again, panels with batch processing in FCS Express. So I'm just going to click on the lightning bolt here. Okay, so now I've actually instituted a pause here in my batch processing actions because, in many cases you do need to adjust your gates between different samples. So for some reason I needed to make this gate smaller or maybe make my size gate a little bit bigger here. I could do that. Okay, and you can see that my sample isotype control ratio, because it's a live updating statistic, updated automatically when I changed my gates. So I'm going to click continue to go to the end of my files in the data list, and we should have my PowerPoint popping up real soon. Okay, here it is. So this time I've only got 2 slides because we only had 1 page in our FCS Express layout, and all of our objects came through. You can move them around and do whatever you need to do with them here in PowerPoint. And so basically, with the click of a button, we've processed all our data. We only had to invest the time up front to design our layout and to define our panel. But once that's done, I can repeat this same experiment 3 or 4 months from now and just load in my data files and just be ready to go with no additional analysis time. Okay? So let me prove to you that that really works. I'm going to save this panel that we've already made unlinked, okay? So it's going to come up empty, and then we're going to load in our data files once again, as if we were repeating this experiment 3 months from now. Okay, so let's save this unlinked, and let's call this our antibody testing panel. Okay, so I'm going to close this and reopen it, and it should be coming up blank since I saved it unlinked to any data files. And I just want to point out you don't necessarily need to save it unlinked, but sometimes it's handy if you plan on using this layout many, many times and you don't necessarily want to look at the original data files that the panel was created with. So now I'm going to load in my files. Whoops, let's navigate to it here. And I can even load in 2 iterations of files at a time. So I'm going to load in isotype controls and positive controls 1 and 2 and samples A and B. Okay, and so now since these were loaded in alphabetical order, all I need to do is just reorder these so that each FCS file is assigned to the appropriate tube. Okay, and this one should be down here. Okay, here we go. So I've actually loaded the second group first, but it really doesn't matter because I can click Next and Previous. And so now you see we're looking at sample A with our lower fluorescence ratio. And if I go back to the first group of tubes in my data list, I'm looking at those sample B with the higher fluorescence ratio. Okay? So are there any questions about how you would do that? Okay, feel free to enter those into the questions and answer box. And I just want to point out that if you click down here on the panel information, it's actually possible to add in additional panels. So if you wanted to use this layout, if you wanted to base a 5-tube panel off of this layout, you could easily do that. And I'm not going to actually build it, but I'm just going to go through some of the motions here. Okay? And so then you would have a choice about whether you want to engage either the 3-tube or the 5-tube panel on the same layout. So there's no need to start from scratch to build a panel that's pretty similar to a panel that you already have. You can simply load that original panel layout and then amend it here and choose to engage the new or the old panel. Okay? Okay, great. So before I let you go, I just also want to point out that it's possible to combine our importers with using panels. So basically, we've talked so far about all these other things, and I want to show you also that you can combine our Diva importer with the panels, and that way you can again get at that high throughput data processing that we all want to do to save time. So I'm not going to go into the details of importing a Diva layout. I'm just going to go through it really quick because we do have a webinar all about that. So let's just navigate to where some of my Diva data is. And so for those of you who don't know, the Diva importer basically allows you to pull in your acquisition workspaces from Diva or Accuray, if you're talking about the Accuray importer. So if you've invested some time making plots and gates in Diva or Accuray and you don't want to recreate the wheel 3 weeks later when you finally sit down to analyze your data, that's what the Diva importer will allow you to do. Okay, so I'm just going to accept most of these defaults here. In case you're curious, these configuration settings are things like page margins and things like that, so I'm just going to click Next. I'm not going to pay attention to those. And we'll take a look at our first data file. Okay, so this is our data that we've imported from FACS-Diva. You can see here that our gates were pulled in from Diva. Okay, you could probably recognize some of this nomenclature, P1, P2, P3. That's how Diva likes to name their gates. And so this is I believe, our analysis tab in FACS-Diva. And if I take a look at my data list, you'll see that we've got 8 tubes assigned here. Okay, and what I'm going to do is convert this into a panel. Okay, so that way I can just use this layout that I've imported into FCS Express over and over again every time I acquire my data with Diva. So again, I'm just going to come down here to No Panel is Active, add a panel. We can call this our Diva panel, or how about our Diva 8-tube panel. Okay, and let's give this 8 tubes, and I'm not going to assign a name to each tube here, although you certainly could. Okay, so now you see that our panel has been defined. All right, and I'm going to save this unlinked just to prove to you that this really works. All right, and let's save this to our desktop. Let's call this our Diva 8-tube panel layout. Okay, so just to point out, I saved that no link, so it's going to come out when I close this and reopen it. It's going to come up blank. Okay, so here our tubes are blank, okay, but we do have the gates and everything here and our plots. So, and you can see where down here where it says panel 8-tube, panel Diva 8-tube panel is active. So I just need to load in those 8 tubes. And you should see very shortly that our plots are going to be automatically populated here in FCS Express. Okay, so with a click of a button, you've basically been able to populate those plots. All right, so if there's any questions, please let us know. And while I'm summing up here, I hope that I've showed you that panels allow you to automate data analysis for repetitive experiments. And I just want to point out, even if you have parameters changing between different experiments, you can still reuse that panel layout, because if you add a pause in your batch processing, you can change the parameters for each iteration. Or if you're not using batch processing, of course, you could easily just change the parameters on those plots, and it'll still save you a lot of time rather than creating the plots from scratch. And that creating, loading, and modifying panels is very easy. So like I showed you, even after we defined that 3-tube isotype control panel, later on we changed our mind. We wanted to add an additional color dot plot for one of the tubes, and that was very easy to do, and it didn't impact on the ability to batch process. And again, you can combine your panels with batch processing actions to process your data in a high throughput manner. And it's easy to combine our Diva and Accuray importers, which pull in those acquisition workspaces with panels in FCS Express. So that way, you'll save even more time. Okay? And so for those of you who haven't already downloaded our demo or maybe aren't already FCS Express customers, I just want to point out to you our website, denovosoftware.com. You can just scroll on down here to Downloads and click on Demo. We have a free 30-day fully functional evaluation version of the program. And if you do need 30 days, more than 30 days, just send us an email. We're usually happy to extend that for you and help you out online with your own data. And if you have any questions, we do have a lot of help online. So on our website, we have a number of help and forums you can look at to search for your answers. Or within the program, you can come over here to help, go to tutorials, for instance, and we actually have a tutorial all about panels, which will show you a lot of the things that I showed you today. Okay, I'm just having a little trouble finding it on here, but we do have it. So if anybody would like a link to it, just let us know. Oh, here it is, creating and using panels. And we also can search by keywords. So if you want to just enter in panels, you can find the reference you're looking for that way. But if you would like to talk to a real live human, just send us an email at support@denovosoftware.com. We're very happy to hear from all of our customers at any time. Okay, so I'll be sticking around for a couple minutes online if there are any questions, but if not, have a great day and thanks for joining us this afternoon.